I knew my marriage to David was dying. The arguments were constant. The stress was crippling, and the bills were crushing us. Then I found the secret. David was diverting our joint savings to his ex-wife, Sarah. He wasn't cheating with her. He was funding her fight against a chronic, debilitating illness. The money was the difference between her medical treatment and her medical bankruptcy. I hold a financial lever that can save my home and my marriage, but pulling it means condemning an innocent woman to a life of unmanaged pain and ruin. To save my own family, I have to choose to destroy the one he left behind. Your vote in the comment section will determine my next move. What I should do, vote A. Expose the secret, save the marriage/condemn Sarah, vote B. Stay silent, save Sarah/condemn the marriage. Thank you for being my judge. I am in your hands. Before we begin this impossible story, please take a moment to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. Your participation is the only thing that can guide my choice. My marriage to David wasn't just struggling, it was actively bleeding out. We were 5 years in, and the initial, buoyant promise of forever had been slowly eroded by a constant, crippling financial tension. Our home, a small townhouse we had fought tooth and nail to afford, had become less a sanctuary and more a courtroom where the only agenda item was where did the money go. I would sit at the kitchen table, running the numbers again and again, watching the joint accounts drain faster than they should. Our income was stable. David works a good, respectable job as an engineer, and I manage a modest consulting firm from home. But every month, the balance felt impossibly thin. The credit card payments would barely cover the minimums, and the emergency savings we promised each other we'd build never materialized. We were always running on fumes, and the financial stress had turned us into two brittle, exhausted strangers. The conflict was constant and always the same. David, where did the $800 go last week? I swear I budgeted for the groceries and the utility deposit, and now we're $300 short. My voice would start firm, then crack with weariness. He would react instantly with defensiveness, a reflexive wall of denial that only deepened my frustration. I don't know, Claire. Things cost more now. Are you scrutinizing every single purchase I make? Maybe you need to cut back on your business supplies. His refusal to cooperate or even look at the statements was the greatest trigger. He made me feel like the villain, the demanding, shrewish wife who was trying to starve the life out of him, when all I was trying to do was keep our heads above water. I wasn't asking for luxury. I was asking for solvency. But his resistance felt absolute, shutting down every attempt at collaboration. The financial hole was invisible, but the secrecy it bred was tearing us apart. The emotional triggers came every night. David would come home from work exhausted, not from the effort of his job, but from the effort of his secrecy. He would retreat to the garage, claiming he needed to work on a project, a transparent excuse to be alone. When he was in the house, he was emotionally distant, short answers, closed body language, and a look in his eyes that was part guilt, part perpetual fear. Our intimacy died a slow, agonizing death. How could I share my body with a man who wouldn't even share the truth of our bank account? The cumulative effect of this hidden drain was terrifying. We missed the payment window on our property tax last quarter, incurring penalties that wiped out our small Christmas fund. We had to decline a trip to visit my aging parents because the cost of the plane tickets was simply out of the question. Every sacrifice felt mandated by this unseen, uncooperative force. I started suffering from crippling anxiety, waking up at 3 a.m. every night, staring at the ceiling and imagining the foreclosure notice arriving in the mail. My health, my sanity, and my faith in our marriage were being consumed by the unknown. I began to suspect the worst. The lack of transparency, the immediate defensiveness, the excuses, it all pointed toward infidelity. I started to believe David was seeing someone else, that he was funding a secret life with the money we desperately needed for the gas bill. The thought was excruciating, but it was a concrete, solvable problem. Infidelity, though painful, has a clear path: confrontation, divorce, and a painful but necessary start over. What I didn't know was that the truth was far more complex, far more agonizingly moral, and entirely unsolvable. I prepared myself for the ugly reality of another woman's receipt hidden in his wallet. I armed myself for the confrontation, ready to demand the truth and end the marriage if necessary. I was bracing myself for betrayal, but I was about to discover something far more crushing. I was bracing myself for humanitarian crisis, and my marriage was merely collateral damage. I was looking for a cheater, but I was about to find a secret philanthropist whose actions were killing his own family. The mystery of the missing money was about to be revealed, and the truth would make me wish for simple infidelity instead. I couldn't live with the suspicion anymore. The anxiety was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest every time David retreated to his garage or snapped at me over a grocery receipt. The thought of confronting him about infidelity was terrifying, but the alternative, this slow, financial suffocation, was unbearable. I needed proof. I needed the concrete evidence that would either end the torture or give me the ammunition I needed for a final, explosive showdown. I knew David was meticulous. He handled the online banking, always claiming it was simpler for him, which in hindsight was his first line of defense. I knew he was hiding something, and I was determined to find the hole in his fortress. One cold Tuesday evening, David was delayed at the office, rushing to finish a project he claimed was taking all his mental energy. I slipped into his home office, a sterile, locked room that always felt like a border I shouldn't cross. I found what I needed not in his wallet, but in a small, locked metal box hidden beneath a stack of engineering manuals. I found the key hidden inside a spare watch case. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely insert it. The lock clicked, and my heart hammered against my ribs, convinced I was about to pull out a love letter or a receipt for jewelry I never received. Instead, I found 2 bank statements for an account I had never seen before, registered solely in David's name, and a small, handwritten ledger. The account was not the main joint account, but a separate savings vehicle. I scanned the recent transactions, my initial terror quickly turning into confusion. There were no expenditures on jewelry, hotel rooms, or romantic dinners. The withdrawals were clinical, regular, and large. Every month, 2 automatic transfers totaling $2,800 flowed out of this secret account. Then I checked the deposits. The source of the money was undeniable. David had been systematically skimming money from our main joint checking account before I even saw the statements, diverting it to this hidden savings account, and then routing it out again. This was planned, calculated financial deception. But where was the money going? The ledger, written in David's precise, engineer's handwriting, was the key. He meticulously recorded each transaction. The outgoing transfers weren't labeled Vegas or jeweler. They were labeled with a single name: S.A. Support. S.A. Support. S.A. was the code. It was a name I knew but hadn't expected to see. Sarah Allen, David's ex-wife. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Infidelity would have been simpler. Infidelity would have meant anger, divorce, and a clean break. This meant moral torment. David wasn't seeing Sarah romantically. He was supporting her financially, systematically draining our solvency to fund her existence. I checked the dates, confirming the support started almost immediately after their divorce was finalized 2 years ago. The financial strain on our marriage hadn't been an accident of inflation. It had been a calculated choice by David to subsidize his ex-wife with our money. I felt a dizzying mix of relief and crushing despair. Relief, because David wasn't cheating on me with another woman. Despair, because he was sacrificing our future to fund his past, and I knew, instinctively, that the true nature of the support was far more complicated than simple misplaced loyalty. I sat back, the hidden ledger open on my lap, the name Sarah Allen staring up at me. The investigation was over, but the moral crisis had just begun. I was facing not just the loss of my marriage, but the impending ruin of someone I barely knew, and the impossible realization that David had turned our life into a life support system for the woman he used to love. I didn't wait for David to return from the office. I couldn't. I sat motionless in his chair, the open ledger resting on my knees, waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. The rage I had prepared for, the righteous anger aimed at a cheating husband, was gone, replaced by a cold, paralyzing dread. I was no longer preparing for a divorce. I was preparing for a moral excavation. When David finally stepped into the room, hours past his usual time, he didn't need to see the ledger. He saw my face, the exhaustion in my eyes, and the quiet truth laid bare on the desk, and he froze. His immediate reaction was total, terrified surrender. "Claire, he started, his voice a dry rasp, the engineer's composure dissolving entirely. He looked like a man who had been running for years and had just hit a wall. I lifted the ledger, not in accusation, but in exhaustion. Sarah Allen, David, $2,800 a month, consistently, for the last 2 years. While we fought about utility bills and missed our property tax payment. While I was losing sleep thinking you were seeing another woman. You were sacrificing us for your ex-wife. I need to know why. And the truth better be worth the destruction of our home." David didn't try to lie. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands, his body shaking with silent, heaving sobs that ripped through the quiet of the room. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, raw, and full of a profound grief I had never seen in him. "She's dying, Claire," he choked out, the words barely audible. "She's not dying now, but she will be, slowly and terribly, if I stop. She has a form of aggressive lupus, rare, debilitating, systemic. It attacks everything. It's why we got divorced, actually. She didn't want me to watch it happen." He explained the terrifying logistics. The standard insurance coverage Sarah had retained from their marriage was useless against the necessary treatment. She required a specific, proprietary biologic infusion, administered biweekly at a specialized clinic 3 states away. The out-of-pocket cost was staggering. The court ordered minimum support, but it's barely $500 a month. Her apartment costs $1,000. The infusions alone are over $2,000 a session. The $2,800 isn't discretionary. It's the bare minimum she needs to cover her rent and those infusions. He didn't plead romance, he pleaded responsibility. When we divorced, she was fine. She got worse rapidly 6 months later. She tried GoFundMe. She tried selling her assets. When I realized she was losing access to the infusions, the treatment that keeps the systemic breakdown at bay, I stepped in. "Claire, without that money, she loses her treatment. She loses her apartment. She loses her ability to fight. She faces medical bankruptcy and total physical incapacitation within 6 months." The truth was a punch to the gut that instantly killed the rage I had carried for months. David hadn't been funding a secret love life. He had been operating a secret life support system. The $2,800 wasn't money he wanted to spend. It was a non-negotiable payment required to keep an innocent woman fighting for her existence. I looked at the ledger, and the transfers, once symbols of my betrayal, now looked like lines on a medical chart. "And you never told me," I whispered, the pain in my voice now focused on his secrecy, not the money. "You watched our marriage suffocate under the financial strain, and you never gave me the dignity of the truth." "How could I, Claire?" David pleaded, despair in his voice. "How do you ask your new wife to sacrifice her financial stability, to put her house and her future at risk, for the ex-wife she barely knows? I knew if I told you, you would tell me to stop. You would tell me we couldn't afford it. And you would have been right. I couldn't bear to look Sarah in the eye and say, I chose my new life over your life. I did this alone, thinking I could manage the stress. I chose the lie to protect both of you. I understood then that my marriage wasn't dying from a lack of love, but from a moral wound. David had made an agonizing, solitary choice to become a covert humanitarian, making our joint savings an unwilling charity fund. I had found the solution to our financial mystery. But the price of closing that mysterious hole was now the life and suffering of a chronically ill woman. The line between right and wrong had dissolved. I was left staring at the terrifying truth. I now possessed the power to save my marriage and myself, but only by actively condemning Sarah Allen to financial and physical ruin. The stage was set for an impossible ethical dilemma. The silence after David's confession was absolute, thick with the weight of 3 shattered lives. He sat weeping, relieved that the secret was out, yet terrified of the verdict. I, meanwhile, was paralyzed, staring at the invisible moral scale where my survival was placed on one side and Sarah Allen's medical fate on the other. The choice wasn't just hypothetical, it was immediate. David's financial deceit had stretched our resources to the absolute limit. We were facing a major mortgage refinance next month that required pristine credit and a large chunk of liquid emergency savings, the very savings that had been systematically diverted for Sarah's care. If I didn't stop the flow of $2,800 immediately and find a way to replace the missing funds, our refinance would be denied. We would lose the lower interest rate, face default, and likely lose our home within the year. I looked at David, who was now begging me, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. Claire, please. You know I love you. I'll stop the lie. I'll give you full access to everything. Just let me continue the support for 6 more months. I'll take a second job. I'll figure it out. You can't figure it out, David. I cut him off, the reality sharp and clinical. You've been trying for 2 years, and the only thing you figured out was how to sacrifice our mortgage for her life. The financial damage is done, and the only way we survive is if that money immediately returns to us and stays here. This brought me to the core of the agony, the 2 mutually destructive paths. Path A, the path of survival. I choose my marriage and my financial solvency. I immediately notify the bank and stop the monthly transfers to Sarah Allen. I tell David that the financial deceit has ended, and he must choose between us and his ex-wife's medical needs. This is the only way to stabilize our accounts, secure the mortgage refinance, and rebuild the trust that David's lies shattered. The emotional cost to me is manageable because I choose to save my own life. However, the consequence for Sarah is guaranteed catastrophe. She loses the $2,800 life support, which means no medication, no bi-weekly infusions, immediate eviction from her apartment, and rapid physical decline. I would have actively chosen to sentence an innocent woman to a slow, painful medical death, all to secure my own lower interest rate. Path B, the path of silence and mercy. I choose Sarah Allen's life. I continue the charade, knowing the $2,800 drain remains. I become David's active accomplice in the financial deception, consciously allowing our marriage to continue suffocating. We lose the refinance, risk default on our home, and my anxiety will escalate, knowing that every financial struggle we endure is directly linked to the medical needs of the woman David divorced. I saved Sarah's life, but I actively condemn my own future to financial instability, stress, and the near-certain collapse of my marriage from the continuous emotional strain. I would have chosen Sarah's right to live over my right to happiness and solvency. I sat there, the quiet dignity of my own pain warring against the horrifying reality of Sarah's slow, agonizing death. I wanted to scream, to find the moral symmetry that justified one over the other. Was I morally obligated to sacrifice my hard-won financial stability, my sanity, and my marriage for a woman who was technically a stranger? Did David's unilateral decision force me into this impossible role? I picked up the hidden ledger and felt the cold, hard weight of the choice. If I act, I am the executioner. If I remain silent, I am the co-conspirator in my own ruin. I am trapped between saving my home and saving her life. There is no solution that allows 3 people to survive this tragedy intact. The money which was supposed to secure my future has become a single, devastating bullet, and I must decide who gets to survive the blast. The confrontation was over, but the trial had just begun. I realized then that my personal happiness had been placed on the judicial block, and the verdict, whether to sacrifice my home for her life or her life for my home, was the most devastating judgment I would ever face. I couldn't just take David's word for it. After the confession, I needed to see the truth of Sarah's situation, not just the emotional justification. If Sarah was merely struggling, the moral equation changed. If she was truly facing death, the cost of my survival was too high. I told David that I would not make a decision until I had verified the clinical reality of her illness and the necessity of the funds. David, now desperate and fully subservient to my verdict, didn't argue. He reluctantly gave me the name of Sarah's doctor and the specialized clinic. This was my first foray into the world of the woman who was secretly draining my life. The documentation I received from the clinic was cold, clinical, and absolutely terrifying. Sarah suffered from an extremely rare, aggressive form of systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE, that specialized in destroying joint capsules and vital organs. The progression was relentless. The key to her stability was the proprietary biologic infusion David mentioned, a drug so new and complex that her standard post-divorce insurance classed it as experimental and non-covered. The biweekly infusions were literally the firewall protecting her from total systemic collapse. I contacted the clinic administrator anonymously, posing as a friend helping with Sarah's account. The facts were stark. Sarah's infusions cost precisely $2,050 per session. If she missed a single one, the doctors warned, the systemic rebound could be irreversible. If she missed 4, they expected permanent organ damage and rapid incapacitation. Her remaining resources were minimal. Her rent and basic living expenses accounted for the remaining $750 David sent each month. The $2,800 was not optional. It was the sum total of her defense against being confined to a hospital bed. The financial ruin was equally stark. I learned Sarah had already liquidated her divorce assets, attempting to self-fund for the first few months after her illness escalated. She had nothing left. If the support from David stopped, there was no backup plan. She would lose the apartment immediately because the disability payments she qualified for were months away and wouldn't even cover half her rent. The clinic would refuse the treatment, and without insurance coverage, she would be completely reliant on emergency room visits, ensuring her rapid physical decline. I understood then that David was telling the absolute truth. My decision was not about inconvenience, it was about life support. I also looked into the human element of the separation. I found an old article from their local paper, written shortly after their divorce. It detailed David's resignation from the board of a local charity where he and Sarah had worked together for years. The article praised David's integrity, but mentioned his deep emotional distress and his insistence on a clean break from his past commitments. David didn't abandon Sarah out of malice. He followed her request to leave the marriage, so he wouldn't be forced to watch her slow, agonizing decline. He severed the emotional ties, but the human link, the responsibility for her survival, had silently remained. I had entered this phase of the story looking for a loophole, a sign that Sarah was exaggerating, or that another government program could save her. I found the opposite, a woman hanging onto life by the thinnest financial thread, a thread that was now running directly through my joint checking account. The moral weight became suffocating. By stopping the transfers, I would save my home and preserve my solvency. I would secure my future and my peace of mind. But I would be effectively signing Sarah Allen's death warrant, condemning a kind, innocent woman to a future of relentless, unmanaged pain simply because my marriage couldn't afford her illness. I was asked to commit a moral assassination to achieve personal stability. The choice was clear in its cruelty, my life or hers. There was no middle ground left. The confirmation of Sarah's critical condition did not bring peace. It ignited a new, profound anguish that threatened to consume me entirely. I knew I couldn't stop the transfers yet, not without a conscious, deliberate choice to sentence her to ruin. But the price of my silence, the price of Sarah's life, was the active, slow decay of my own existence and the integrity of my marriage. David's confession did not lead to partnership. It merely forced me into the role of his unwilling accomplice. The emotional damage was no longer rooted in suspicion of infidelity, but in the guilt of joint deception. Every time I looked at our bank statements, I was actively calculating how much closer we were to default, knowing I couldn't breathe a word to my own business partners or friends. I was forced to smile and agree to cut corners. Yes, David, let's skip the car repair this month, we need to save, while knowing exactly where the required funds were going. This complicity turned my anxiety from a generalized fear into a targeted, relentless psychological assault. My sleep became a casualty of the moral debt. I suffered from crippling insomnia, often waking up drenched in sweat at 4 a.m., haunted not by bills, but by the clinical descriptions of Sarah's systemic collapse if she missed her infusions. My mind would run brutal, internal calculations. If I lose the house, Sarah lives. If Sarah dies, I keep my home. The exhaustion became physical, making my consulting work suffer, which only compounded the financial crisis. I was sacrificing my professional capacity to fund the deception that was killing my marriage. The strain metastasized into the one area of our marriage that David desperately wanted to fix: intimacy. Post-confession, David tried to reconnect. He was relieved that I knew the truth and seemed genuinely remorseful for his secrecy. But when he reached for me, I recoiled, not out of anger, but out of a visceral sense of moral contamination. How could I embrace him, knowing that the warmth and safety of our bed were being paid for by the chronic pain of another woman? Our physical connection was utterly destroyed by the invisible presence of Sarah's illness, a presence that was sustained by our dwindling resources. I was emotionally incapable of giving myself to a man who was actively, if mercifully, lying to the world to keep his ex-wife alive. The greatest sacrifice was the integrity of my voice. David needed me to be silent to save Sarah. I needed to speak to save myself. I went weeks without arguing about money, not because we had reached an agreement, but because the truth was too dangerous to touch. The emotional safety I craved, the ability to plan our future openly and honestly, was permanently compromised. David had chosen silence over our marriage's stability. By choosing Sarah's life, I was forced to choose the silent, suffocating death of my own happiness. The continuous financial hemorrhage was now threatening my ability to function as a business owner. I delayed paying my quarterly taxes, a decision that carried its own severe legal and financial penalties. Every act of mercy towards Sarah was an act of financial violence toward my own life. I was near the breaking point, sacrificing my mental health, my professional reputation, and my sanity, all to protect a woman who was technically a stranger, simply because the moral burden of condemning her was too great. I knew that soon, David's secrecy and my subsequent silence would lead to a consequence that would force my hand, a problem that could not be solved by simply enduring the stress. The financial deception was too large, too reckless, and too long-standing. I was waiting for the final external hammer to fall, realizing that the only thing that could save me now was an overwhelming legal mandate that would override my conscience. Until then, I was trapped in this agonizing limbo, sacrificing myself inch by agonizing inch to keep Sarah Allen alive. The hammer fell precisely where I knew it would: the paperwork. I received a certified letter from our mortgage lender, a letter that was cold, formal, and devastatingly efficient. It stated that due to insufficient liquid savings reserves and a significant, documented discrepancy in our recent tax filings, our application for the essential mortgage refinance was officially denied. Our current, higher interest rate was locked in, and a default notice was pending if our reserves were not replenished within 45 days. I scheduled an emergency meeting with our financial advisor, Miss Chun, immediately. I couldn't risk telling David yet. He would only relapse into his denial. I needed professional validation of the catastrophe. Miss Chun, a meticulous woman, laid out the damage. Claire, the continuous $2,800 drain wasn't just stressful, it created a paper trail of financial deception. David transferred nearly $34,000 last year that was never accounted for as business expense or personal gift. The bank saw the massive, systematic transfer out of the joint account and the resulting low reserve balance and flagged it as high-risk liquidity fraud. They suspect money laundering, or worse, that we misrepresented our actual income and debt ratio on the original mortgage. The word fraud sliced through my anxiety like a knife. It was no longer about missing a payment. It was about criminal exposure. Furthermore, Miss Chen continued, tapping her pen on the ledger, those transfers, if listed as a personal gift or support, carry an immense, undeclared tax liability. If the IRS audits us, and they will given the bank's flags, we face penalties that could wipe out any savings we managed to rebuild. The legal ramifications of covering up this financial shell game are now catastrophic to your business and your home. She looked at me, her expression grim. We have a single path to survival, Claire. To undo the fraud flag and convince the bank that you are not liable for this massive debt. We must immediately report the transfers as unauthorized, non-marital diversions. I felt the blood run cold. You mean I have to tell them David was stealing from our joint assets? Precisely, she confirmed. You file a police report or a formal statement of marital theft. You distance yourself legally from the debt and the deception. The law requires you to expose the financial misconduct to protect your own solvency. If you fail to expose the truth of where that $2,800 has gone, if you continue to cover for David's actions, you become a full, legal co-conspirator. You will lose the home, and the resulting tax and fraud penalties will ensure your consulting business is permanently ruined. She pushed a document toward me, a declaration of financial theft, ready for my signature. You have 48 hours, Claire. You expose the secret, or you lose everything you have worked for, all while Sarah Allen remains funded. The choice is no longer moral. It is mandatory legal survival. I drove home that afternoon, the legal ultimatum burning a hole in my passenger seat. I was trapped. I had always believed I could choose between saving Sarah's life and saving my marriage, but Miss Chen revealed the third, terrifying option: lose everything, including my freedom. I was now forced to choose between the life of Sarah Allen and my own legal and financial survival. The cost of mercy had become too high. The law itself now demanded I become the executioner. The 48-hour legal deadline Miss Chen imposed was an engine of pure agony. I sat at the kitchen table, the declaration of financial theft, the document that secured my safety, lying beside Sarah's medical report, and realized the full, crushing weight of the moral trade. The decision had been stripped of sentimentality and reduced to two cold, brutal outcomes. I reviewed the cost of choice A, exposure and survival. If I sign the document, I save myself. The bank and the IRS will see me as a victim of marital financial fraud, not a co-conspirator. My home is safe, my business is solvent, and my marriage is either salvaged by David's complete, painful accountability, or it ends cleanly in a divorce where I am legally protected. I regain my sanity, I end the anxiety, and I secure the future I fought for. But I must fully articulate David's deception, the systemic theft of $34,000, and confirm that those funds went to Sarah Allen. The immediate consequence is Sarah losing her life support. Her infusions stop, her eviction is guaranteed, and her physical condition will deteriorate rapidly and irreversibly. I would have used the law to murder her by poverty, sentencing an innocent, sick woman to a slow, agonizing demise to preserve my low interest rate. The price of my solvency is Sarah's life. Then I reviewed the cost of choice B, silence and mercy. If I refuse to sign, I honor the moral imperative not to condemn a sick woman to death. Sarah Allen lives, her infusions continue, and she maintains her fragile stability. But I must accept the mandatory ruin of my own life. The bank will call our default, Our refinance is dead, and the threat of severe penalties from the IRS for misrepresentation and fraud becomes a guarantee. I will lose our home. My consulting business, already faltering under the weight of my anxiety and tax arrears, will be destroyed. My marriage, already broken by years of deception and stress, will shatter under the public, legal, and financial pressure. I would have sacrificed my entire future, my home, and my professional integrity to save a woman David should have legally protected. The price of Sarah's life is my total destruction. I was trapped between two profound, unforgivable betrayals. David had betrayed me, but I was now being asked to commit a betrayal exponentially worse. Was I truly capable of condemning Sarah, a woman who had already suffered enough, simply because David failed to be honest? Yet, was I truly capable of silently watching my entire life, my home, my sanity, my career be wiped out, knowing the destruction was caused by money that was not my obligation? I paced the living room, feeling the walls of the house closing in on me. I wanted desperately to find a third path, a way to crowdfund Sarah's care or find her better insurance. But Miss Chen was clear. The legal crisis was too immediate, the debt too deep, and the fraud flag too insistent. My choice had to be made now. I couldn't save Sarah by finding a solution. I could only save her by personally accepting ruin. I picked up the declaration of theft. It felt cold, powerful, and utterly evil. I held it against my heart, the ultimate weapon against Sarah's fragility. I realized that my moral obligation to a stranger was actively conflicting with my right to self-preservation. I was too emotionally compromised, too deeply wounded, and too terrified of the consequences to sign the document or to burn it. I was paralyzed by the ethics of survival. My trial ends here. I have exhausted my ability to serve as my own judge. The two paths are clear: a catastrophic victory for me, or total ruin for us both. I must hand the power over to the only authority left, the collective judgment of the world. I am asking you to assume the role of the judge, the moral arbitrator, and the jury. The fate of Sarah Allen and the future of my marriage now rest entirely on your verdict. It is 6 a.m. The declaration of theft is sitting on my kitchen counter, waiting. I have less than 3 hours before the financial advisor's office opens, and if that document is not filed, the legal machinery that will destroy my life begins to churn. David is asleep in the next room, unaware that his secrecy has now placed the future of his ex-wife and his current wife on a single guillotine. I am completely and utterly spent, having arrived at the moral terminus of this devastating reality. I need you to step into this kitchen, look at this impossible evidence, and give me a verdict that I am too fearful and too morally scarred to deliver myself. This is no longer a matter of opinion. It is a mandate of conscience. I am asking you to decide the life and death equation for 3 people. Every day for the last 2 years, I endured the sacrifice of silence, believing that preserving Sarah's life was worth the cost of my sanity. Now, the law forces the issue, and I can no longer afford to be a martyr. Examine the evidence. On one side, you have the absolute certainty of my legal and financial destruction, choice B. This path ensures Sarah lives, but it guarantees I lose my home, my professional career, and my standing as a solvent citizen simply because I chose to protect a stranger from the consequences of our broken medical system. I would be condemned by the law, but saved by my own compassion. On the other side, you have the absolute certainty of Sarah's medical destruction, choice A. This path ensures I survive the legal crisis, secure my home, and gain a clear path to rebuilding my marriage, free from financial fraud. But I become the conscious instrument of Sarah's death by poverty, actively stopping the life-saving infusions she desperately needs. I would be saved by the law, but condemned by my own conscience. I am paralyzed because there is no ethical symmetry. David created a moral debt that I cannot pay without destroying myself. I cannot save us both. I am asking you to tell me which failure. The failure of compassion, choice A, or the failure of self-preservation, choice B, is the one I must ultimately live with. The question is not, can I survive this? The question is, should I survive this if the price is Sarah Allen's life? Please, look at the cold reality of the medical reports and the legal documents. Judge this crisis not by sentimentality, but by the highest moral code you possess. I have done all I can to tell you the truth. Now, I need you to tell me how to use the power I possess. The declaration of theft waits for my hand to move. I need your definitive verdict to determine who gets to live and who gets to face ruin. The dawn has broken, and the clock is closing in on the 9 a.m. deadline. The declaration of financial theft is waiting for my signature, and the weight of that simple pen stroke is the heaviest burden I have ever known. I have laid bare every agonizing detail: the theft, the disease, the legal trap, and the 3 lives caught in this impossible ethical vice. The time for deliberation is over. I must now turn the final, irreversible judgment over to you, the anonymous jury who has followed every devastating step of this crisis. The dilemma is simple in its execution, but catastrophic in its morality. I must choose which person deserves to survive this cruel equation: the innocent woman whose life depends on the money, or the current wife whose solvency depends on stopping the money. The choice is a forced, zero-sum game of human value. Examine the final choice: my survival versus her life. Option A: expose the secret, choose self-preservation. The action: I sign the declaration, filing the statement that David committed marital financial theft to fund Sarah. The transfers stop immediately. The result: my gain: I secure my home, my business, and my freedom from the looming fraud penalties. I survive the crisis intact. The price: her ruined Sarah Allen, the chronically ill ex-wife, loses her funding, her infusions, and her apartment. She faces guaranteed medical bankruptcy, irreversible physical decline, and death by poverty. I will have knowingly condemned her to a painful demise. Option B: stay silent, choose compassion. The action: I refuse to sign the legal document covering for David's actions for another month. The transfers continue. The result: her gain: Sarah Allen lives. She gets her next set of life-saving infusions, and her apartment is safe. The price: my ruin: I become a legal co-conspirator, guaranteeing the bank will seize our home and the IRS will destroy my consulting business. I sacrifice my future and financial stability, choosing perpetual stress and ultimate ruin to preserve a stranger's life. I am standing here, paralyzed by the cost of being human. I cannot reconcile the brutal necessity of the law with the overwhelming mandate of mercy. I refuse to be the one person in this tragic triangle to dictate which innocent party must die for the other to live. I am placing the entire burden of this judgment onto your collective conscience. I need a definitive, final mandate that tells me which ethical violation, the violation of compassion or the violation of self-preservation, is the one I must commit. Your vote is my only salvation. Please look at the cold reality of the medical reports and the legal documents. Judge this crisis not by sentimentality, but by the highest moral code you possess. The declaration of theft waits for my hand to move. I am ready for the verdict. I promise to follow the outcome, no matter how devastating the fallout may be, and I will detail the immediate, crushing consequences in the follow-up video, what I should do. The verdict next week. Vote A: expose the secret, save the marriage/condemn Sarah. Vote B: stay silent, save Sarah/condemn the marriage. Thank you for being my judge. I am in your hands.